All right, it's another film study. Here we are going to do this again, another bi-week roster evaluation episode. Ken McKusick, how you doing?
Life's good, Josh. How about you?
I am all good. Just counting down to Steelers night. And joining us, as always, is Brian McFarland from Russell Street Report. Brian, how are you?
Good, gentlemen. How about you guys today?
Doing all good.
Yep. Thanks for joining us.
And of course, by Steeler night, I mean 1:00 in the afternoon, because it's weird that a Steelers game is not a primetime game coming up.
You're thinking of our Afghanistan watchers and whatnot who are rooting for the Ravens, and yes, it'll be nighttime there.
All right. Well, I'm glad you got that math figured out. It would have been at least 5 minutes of silence if I tried to figure out what time it was in Afghanistan. But all right, real quick. MyBookie, we talked about it yesterday on the show. We talked about it on Monday on the show. You're going to hear about it all week because we love MyBookie. You guys know what MyBookie is. It lets you put down some money on all these NFL games, the World Series, the election, whatever you want. If you're the type of guy that likes to back big favorites, then consider putting a couple in a parlay for a much bigger payout. Not only do parlays make meaningless games more exciting, but they also give you a chance to turn ordinary bets into real moneymaker. Because I'll tell you, you don't make much money betting on the Chiefs alone. But if you combine the Chiefs with some other favorites, you can have a lot of fun doing that. So go on over and sign up at MyBookie. And when you do this, you use our promo code RAVENS to claim a deposit match dollar for dollar all the way up to $1,000.
And this is the part you can't mumble your way through that and not discuss that. $1,000 matching bonus. I mean, I don't know, but I'm a coupon Las Vegas guy. And when we used to go there regularly all the time, every time I had a chance for matching dollars or a free bet or this or that, we'd take every one of those. We'd paper out the whole strip to do it.
Yeah, but you got to use our code RAVENS in order to get that dollar for dollar. So you do that, hop on over there. You've got UFC this week. You've got the presidential stuff and elections. You got World Series. You've got NFL, college football. I think is this the Mike Tyson boxing match? Is that this weekend too?
There's
all types of stuff that you can. Might be the following weekend, but it's coming up soon. So you can bet on all types of stuff over at MyBookie, and make sure you use the promo code RAVENS so you get that dollar for dollar, and then they also know that you're coming from Filmstudy.
Nice.
All right, bi-week's roster evaluation. If you didn't listen to the previous episode, you might want to go back and listen to the defensive breakdown because we're about to do the same thing with the offense. Ken, how about those 5 categories again in case someone missed it yesterday?
Real quick, we'll go faster. The young producer categories, guys who are on their rookie contract. You're not paying them a lot of money, but they're already starting or contributing significantly to your team. The developmental group on their first contract still, but they haven't quite developed into that young producer category. Something is holding them back. You want as many of those as possible too, because those are your chances to, move up in class to that young producer category. Veterans playing for market value. Those are guys where you spend a lot of your cap. I'll have a lot of players in that category. The next one down is veteran cap value concerns. You want as few as possible there. And then the last category is transitional. Those may be young, they may be older players, and maybe veteran players, but they're guys who don't really have a long-term future with the team. All right. As we're joined here by Brian McFarland to talk through this, and we're just going to start with the young producers, go one at a time. I do want to say in general, if you looked at anything that related cap to production last year on offense, the Ravens offense was a complete outlier and historic in nature.
Yeah, and I was just, looking at your lists, and it dawned on me how, from the first time I did this 4 or 5 years ago with you, I'm not sure how it is totally flipped, how the defense was young, producer. The offense was old and non-producer, I guess we'll say. And there weren't a lot of young producers on offense. And how, you look at your list, and that's a pretty good darn list.
Yeah, it's a terrific list of 8 players in the young producer category. First of all, that's a large number for either side of the ball to have 8 guys who are effectively starters or have a significant role in the offense or the defense for that matter. The defense, by the way, had 3. this year. And that's not like they're bad players. It's just, it had 2 last year at the end of the year, but Humphrey and Clark both have now got their long-term deals in place.
Right.
And they've got 3, you guys, it's the transitional nature of football. So let's just look at these young producers one at a time. Mark Andrews being the first alphabetically in that group. Obviously, terrific 3-year career now as a tight end. And now the Ravens have to decide if they can afford to pay him.
Yeah, and it'll be interesting because we've got a couple on the list here in this group that will be eligible for extensions after this season. But as we discussed about with the defense, COVID, the cap dropping to, the floor being the 175. So will some of these guys have to wait a year? Will they want to wait a year? Because teams can be creative. The Mahomes deal was very creative as far as keeping those numbers low. Humphrey's deal that he just signed last month did not change his cap number for this year and did not change his cap number for next year. So keeping those, not that his cap number for next year was low necessarily, but keeping those lower over the next 2 years to address this situation. So there are certainly ways to structure deals. You can re-sign guys, but you have to wonder if some guys are going to be, I'll wait a year and see what happens, and hopefully put up the same or better numbers again, same numbers again or even better numbers. So it'll be interesting to see what happens with Andrews. But yeah, I mean, he certainly earned it.
Yeah, so most of these guys on this list are in their 2nd or 3rd year. There is one exception of a first-year player we'll get to. Andrews is a player they could certainly extend after 3 years. I don't think anybody would have an objection to it. I just wonder if Andrews is going to want it, or if he's going to want to have more leverage after year 4. But I guess we'll see. The other thing, it's not just more leverage. It's avoid the COVID year re-signing that would be at a lower rate.
Well, and that's true, but more leverage is correct also, because you've seen where Stanley waited till Tunsil got his deal. So those are kind of things that players may not the players may not think about it, but the agents might. And in this case, when with the Ravens having Andrews and Brown, who we'll get to, and perhaps a couple other players, that will be coming up as free agents all at the same time, that creates a crunch sometimes. And, so sometimes that's the advantage to get it done sooner, or sometimes, sometimes it makes you wait because, you're more important than he is. Now, sometimes teams will try to play them off of each other. So, I mean, it is certainly a balancing act, but but certainly COVID is all of this is, a huge deal.
Ronnie Stanley already in his 5th year, so he's really in my veteran category. But I want to talk about him right now in terms of the playing off each other that you just mentioned. Do you think there was some of that going on between the deal that could have got done for Stanley and the deal that did get done for Humphrey? And I especially ask that because Humphrey kind of cut the line a little bit ahead of Stanley in some sense to get his deal a year earlier in the relative sense. You get 2017 draft pick versus 16.
Yeah, I mean, it's you don't know if that's what he wanted to do or if that's what the Ravens wanted to do. If he maybe, said, I want to get it done now, I want the security. Or whether he's just been amenable all along more. And obviously the Tunsil deal is a big issue for Stanley if he wants more than that. Humphrey did take less than Ramsey. So he didn't try to top the market. Stanley, there were reports that he wanted more than Tunsil. So that kind of goes with our, conversation about Judon last, with the defense. It's just, sometimes they price themselves out, and, Ozzie was always good about, okay, that's as high as we'll go. If you can find something somewhere else, more power to you, So I don't know, if that's, you just never know, and different agents handle it differently.
Be really sad if Stanley's lost that way, but he's a Ring of Honor candidate who's ready to happen if he signs a second deal here, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm in a question, and I think right tackle is the better place for Brown, but obviously he played left tackle in college, and is if the Ravens thought that he could switch over, that's playing maybe all of a sudden he gets the extension, and they decide to go that direction. I prefer them right where they are,
Yeah, me
obviously.
too.
But yeah, I mean, you just never know. Orlando Brown has a family history here, so does that play into him wanting to be around more? Who knows?
Yeah, it could be. Let's keep moving on with the young producers, because I kind of just got us ourselves off track a little bit. But Bradley Bozeman and the next guy on the list here, been sneakily very consistent for the last 16 games or so. Not quite Marshall Yanda consistent, not quite Marshall Yanda good,
Period.
but
Right?
definitely very consistent over that period.
Yeah, and I mean that's I think what I mean, obviously I think we now realize what the big loss, that Yonda was a huge loss. And not that we didn't know it was going to be felt, but I don't know that we knew it was going to be as good as the offensive line was last year. I don't think, at least I didn't. Maybe I'll speak for myself, but I didn't think it was going to be as such a difference. So yeah, you want and if you get your interior offensive linemen who are solid, I don't know however you want to define that. If you consider him solid, if you get three guys across the middle that are solid, you're in pretty good shape. Um, so now he was a center in college. Is that something? We're going to get to Skura, but is that something that Skura is going to be a free agent? Is that one of those trade offs you make of we'll move Bozeman over, and then we've got a lot of interior linemen at this point. So is that something they'll look to to move around?
So that's obviously one of the decisions. I guess the guy, he's the guy in the young producer group that I think there's the potential, because he's not right at the top tier of players, that you might get a value re-sign after 3 years from. So he's a draft pick. He's subject to the 3-year rule, but this winter they could sign him, say, for 3 years for $15 million. Maybe that's not the right amount. Maybe it's less. Maybe it's more. I'm not sure what the amount would be. Maybe it's 3 years tacked on at $15 million after he plays out the fourth on his rookie deal.
Right. Yeah. I mean, that's probably in the range, probably a little more. I'm thinking back to James Hurst's contract, which kind of came out of nowhere.
17 million for 4 years.
Yeah. So, I mean, I would think it would have to be a bump on that, given it's been, 3 or 4 years ago now. But, I would say, I mean, Hurst had one good year. And, I mean, assuming Bozeman can put another solid year together, then I would say he's more deserving than Hurst was. Hurst had the advantage of being able to be a swing tackle. So, not, and he played that 1 year really well, but that seemed to be the outlier
Right.
for his career. Where is he now?
New Orleans, and week 5 he came off of the suspension list.
Oh, that's right, because that's right, he was suspended. I forgot about that. Yeah, so yeah, so sorry to go on that tangent, but
No,
yeah, so I think Bozeman. I think you've got, I think he would be a guy you if you get him for the right price would be a good re-signing for sure.
I mean, I like the early extensions where you could get a value are where I want to look. And he's one of those. Marquise Brown, I don't think is going to be one of those, but he's only completing his second year now. He's the next guy on the list. Don't think we need to really say too much about him. Obviously, the connection with Lamar is terrific, but he's around for 2 more years, a number 1 draft pick. Actually, probably around here for 3, right?
Right. He can. Yeah. I mean, they've got control for the 3, so they got plenty of time to figure that one out for sure.
All right. Moving on, we got Orlando Brown. We talked a little bit about, but he is a guy who, an 18 draft pick, who again could be a guy you extend at the end of this year. I just think his market value might be a little too high to get a real bargain. And if he wants to go somewhere else and be a left tackle, and maybe the opportunity to play as a left tackle occurs here at some point, perhaps due to injury, he might be better. Might be better suited off to wait it out.
Yeah, I think that's true, and obviously, because that kind of thing allows him, if they tag Stanley next year, And the only way he can do that is if Stanley gets injured. But maybe that's where you don't, as you said, you don't jump. If they, if the Ravens come with an offer next off season, maybe he doesn't jump because, he's got more leverage if he can show he can play left tackle, and he's got more leverage. He would just just be more leverage down the road for him for sure. Or if they tag Stanley, what's going to happen the next year? They're going to tag him again, and then Brown can potentially argue with either I should be the right left tackle here, or to another team, he can say I can play left tackle and you've got an opening and that's where you should sign me. And left tackles are more expensive than right tackles, so pay me.
Yeah, there definitely be opportunities because there's a lot of teams always who need a left tackle who have get hurt, whatever, but they need a left tackle, very commonly. Moving on to the next player is J.K. Dobbins, the only rookie on the list. To me, he's an interesting case because he might not have made it right on his playing ability so far because he really hasn't got all that many carries so far. But when he has carried the ball, he's been effective. When he's caught the ball, he's been pretty effective. Been more effective than I expected as a pass blocker. And I think more importantly, maybe for this list is Edwards will be an RFA next year in a year where an RFA money has to be seriously considered. And Mark Ingram is really in that veteran cap value concern for me, is that, next year in particular, they're probably going to have to cut him as I would see things.
Yeah, I think that's I think you got it because, Edwards is obviously all 3 years now, counting going back to his rookie year, but has shown he can, other than some fumbles here and there, which he seems to have corrected, but I think, and he got Justice Hill still around. So for next year, if you hold on to Edwards and if and especially with his injury now doesn't seem to help out. But if Ingram is a cap casualty, you've still got your three guys in place. Three quote unquote veterans. They're not veterans, but they certainly have NFL experience at that point. So. And, Dobbins is, projected to be a workhorse.
Yeah.
I think that's, obviously when he was picked, it was a little surprising, but you don't want to have to, I hate to say it, you want to run your running backs for 4 years and then find some new running backs.
Was just going to say that, I think the Ravens have learned their lesson on second contract running backs. Ingram obviously signed after not having a tremendous workload for his first 7 years in the league or whatever it was before he came to the Ravens. But Dobbins had an outrageous workload at Ohio State,
Sure.
Including a 2,000-yard season. So I wouldn't project certainly for him to go past those 4 years with the Ravens. And I think that really makes sense at this point.
Yeah, I think so. And, Ingram was, he certainly wasn't at the top of the market. I thought that was a great deal. And they can get out from under it, and we'll get to that. We'll get to that. But that's something that that's part of it being a great deal.
Yeah. All right. Well, Gus Edwards is going to be an interesting thing. Do you think he might be a candidate to come back for less than the tender amount for a second round player?
I would be surprised. Obviously, it would have to be the second round. Although, the Ravens have done this before, actually they can't because he's undrafted, so there's no compensation. But
a low tender, yeah.
They've done low tenders before, but that was with low round draft picks.
This would give you the right to match, though.
You're right.
Low tender,
match, right? And granted, you got some wiggle room there. Okay, but we won't match, but you got to trade us a 6th round pick. But is would you rather? Where they are now and where they expect to be next year, do you want a 6th round pick or do you want Edwards? So in that kind of scenario, so I think he's going to get the second round. Seems a little high, but especially if Ingram's gone, then you're putting a second round on him.
Right. Yeah, it does mean you still have to make a pretty significant salary cap contribution at running back. I'm always not crazy about this in terms of the draft capital spend either, because they went for a running back and 2 inside linebackers, 3 positions that I would argue are great ones to conserve cap at.
Right. Sure. Yeah, absolutely.
All right, let's move on. Lamar Jackson, obviously, we'll get a big contract. Do you think it will be after this year or after year 4?
Without COVID, I would have said it would be after this year. But again, I don't know if that's one of those where, and I think the Ravens should probably want it sooner rather than later, given, his running style. I mean, certainly there's, yeah, I mean, people argue both ways, but I think there is more of a chance of injury the more he runs. So, you'd probably rather get him signed sooner, figuring that he might have a, not as long of a career as some quarterbacks who are, staying in the pocket and not, exposing themselves to, worse hits from, an angle that they're not expecting, so to speak. So, but again, it's so hard to say with COVID. It's just, his cap number is still low next year. So that's the other hand, the Ravens would probably rather, in the COVID year, keep it right where it is, and say, look, next off season, being the following off season, I should say, that, we're going to make this right. But, we're looking at a Super Bowl this year, and, but with the cap coming down, we just need to wait a year with you. And if we have to franchise Stanley, and if we have to franchise Ngakwe, we can't pull this off unless it's a really super team friendly structure, which is probably unlikely to be what Lamar's looking for.
Now, that said, we wouldn't expect the same sort of deal that the Chiefs gave Mahomes, where there's a 10-year extension to the 2 he already had still left.
No.
But would that structure, would a 5-year extension, say, to the 2 he already has left, be a reasonable thing to meet both needs of, you don't want to bet forever on Lamar Jackson, but you also would love to sign him for a relatively long period of time and keep the cap value somewhat low for these first 2 years of the deal?
Well, I mean, the longer the deal, the bigger the signing bonus can be and things like that, because it's getting spread out over time. So, in most of these contracts, I mean, Mahomes might be different just because of the length of it, but in a lot of these, whether it's Watson or Wentz or the guys or Goff who went the year before, and you look at Roethlisberger's contract, I mean, and Breeze and Brady, I mean, they were all being redone. The Flacco deal was redone after 3 years. So those kind of deals generally get redone just because of the structure of them. And at some point, we need more cap space, and he's got a $25 million salary, and that's a great place to go get cap space from.
Mm-hmm.
So then it gets restructured. Whether it gets extended or not, that usually doesn't happen until later in the deal. So that's why most quarterback contracts are going to be longer. They're going to be and adding 5 to 2 more, so it's a 7 in total. That's probably reasonable for Lamar. I think Wentz, or I think it was Goff. I think Goff added like 6 to the remaining 2. So I mean, I think his is longer. But yeah. I mean, but that just allows you to extend some of the money out. But in those last years, once all the guaranteed money's gone, it doesn't really mean anything, and that's when it's going to get ripped up anyway.
Right. All right. Well, it's interesting because you mentioned Roethlisberger here, but the Steelers, I mean, their cap situation obviously is a complete mess for next year. And, one of the things about it, I wish Roethlisberger were playing worse right now, that I was more excited about this being the case. But if you talk to Steelers fans, they say they're going to need to extend Roethlisberger just to reduce his cap number for next year, period.
Yeah, unless he retires. But that then, that creates more dead money down the road. But depending upon how he structures it, maybe they can set it up so that it's not so terrible. And it can reduce some of that dead money down the road. But yeah, I mean, so the Steelers do contracts differently.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, honestly, I've heard, for not to go on a tangent here, but for years, it's the Steelers next year. They're going to finally have to pay the piper. Finally have to pay the piper. Well, they don't. Their contracts aren't. They don't give a lot of guaranteed money up front, so they have a lot of wiggle room. But they give high salaries, so they have a lot of wiggle room in those salaries over the years. Whereas the Ravens used to, and now they're doing better with these now. But some of it, like Haloti Ngata's contract was kind of what I would call pre-restructured because it was so low for so many years that it was almost like you could have given him more, but you just restructured it. So, but then but at the end of it, they had to do something and they didn't want to get rid of him, but they couldn't work out numbers on an extension. So they had to trade him. So that's so now the Ravens are adding more flexibility into their contracts. Although we'll see this next batch with COVID, who knows, that may be a little different where they go back to 2 or 3 years of really low numbers and then they really jump up.
Yeah, I would like them to see them keep the contend every year, I'll call it, methodology of levelizing contracts and trying to stay ahead of it, because it's when you then get a windfall of dollars, you can use it to sign a Chuck Clark or a Pat Ricard contract that ends up being a real value.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah,
All right, well,
they'd be in great. I mean, if this cap was going to be 15 million like expected, they'd be in great shape. And most of these names we've talked to over these 2 episodes, I mean, they could sign most of them. Even all the big guys together. I mean, wouldn't be, can we keep Judon and can we keep Ngakwe? It might be yes, both. So, but that's such is life.
All right. So the last guy on the young producer list is Matt Skura. Obviously a sad story for him because he was going to be in a position to go into his final season. This year is his 4th year, correct? I think that's right?
Yeah. He's on the RFA contract this year.
Okay. And so he's a player who might have a chance to walk. I think the interest is going to be less in him now after the injury, but his grading has not been bad this year at center, not as I do it anyway. And, do you think he's a guy the Ravens may find a way to keep around, or do you think he's more likely to not be in Baltimore next year?
Well, I mean, obviously with the injury, it depends on how I hit the most important games for him or, the next 10. Because you figure he's, had time to get up to speed and not having a training camp and that kind of stuff certainly didn't probably help him. So given the amount of interior, I mean, they just, they've added linemen over the last couple of years in the interior through the draft. I think Skura probably fits that right player, right price category, especially that Ozzie was so fond of, saying. And if they get him for the right price, sure. But if somebody's going to offer them more than their price, then, we'll move on to the younger guys who are here for a reason. And hopefully, they believe in them. And hopefully those are guys that can step up if need be.
All right. So that takes care of the young producer group. Let's look at the developmental group. In the offense, 17 guys in these top 2 groups. So it's still a lot of youth on this team. A lot of it is already producing, but there's still a fair number of guys behind them, particularly on the offensive line, but also at receiver who are in the developmental category. Some of that good, some of that bad. The first name on the list is Miles Boykin, who it's probably bad that he's still in the developmental category at this point as opposed to being a producer.
Yeah, I mean, he certainly has the opportunity, and he's certainly the type of receiver. I mean, there's definitely a role for him as the big receiver, but for whatever reason, he's shown some flashes here and there, but for whatever reason, he and Lamar just do not seem to be on the same page, and that doesn't bode very well. Then you look at Chase Claypool because they both went to Notre Dame, didn't they?
Right.
Yeah. So you look at him go, I don't know I didn't notice how he did today, but setting the world on fire in Pittsburgh, and you think we got the wrong Notre Dame big Notre Dame wide receiver. So obviously that's a small sample size for both of them at this point, but yeah, I mean he's got every opportunity, but if he doesn't if he doesn't hit it this year, you got to wonder what they'll look for, be it in the draft or as a veteran next year. Again, depending upon cap considerations.
Well, there've been two not so subtle moves, one a little bit more subtle than the other, but Devin Duvernay got 26 snaps this last week. That's up from, getting 5-8 snaps a game kind of thing. And so right there, you're hearing something about, wanting to get Duvernay more involved in the offense, which really means getting Miles Boykin less involved. Miles Boykin been a terrific run blocker, just does not seem to run routes in the way that is expected. And the only way they're going to get him back in is if they start scheming trust throws for him, meaning scheme throws where Lamar has to put the ball up to a specific spot on the field and Boykin knows where he has to get to, or back shoulder or whatever it might be.
Right.
But figure out a way to scheme those in to then, you don't want to have to force a bond by trust because that's not how trust works. But on the other hand, you almost have to create opportunity for it.
Yeah. And, maybe that's one of those, lack of OTAs, has really affected it. But, yeah, he had a great preseason last year, so he really, he kind of faded during the season, but I think some of that was just Lamar, having preferential targets, I guess we'll say. But this year, and that may still exist, the preferential targets still certainly exist, but every time he's tried to get the Boykin, it's just not happening.
Right. The only good thing I've seen is Boykin has been involved in some extended plays this year to a greater rate than he was last year. Those are good ways to build trust. Be in the right place when Lamar's under pressure to then make a throw to him. I think there have been some good examples of that earlier in the year, but yeah. It's not a good thing that he's here. You talk about the offseason a little bit. I just want to spend a little more time on him because he got a jugs gun. He bought that for himself. I thought that was a great sign that he would take a step forward as a receiver. I think he needs a receiving coach, somebody who tells him more about footwork and running routes this offseason, and then also probably needs to spend time with Lamar catching the football from him.
Yeah. And that's a lot of the second year guys. They always say that the big jump is supposed to happen that first, getting a full off season. And, a lot of these guys obviously these guys didn't get that. So, whether that's, and he may have been just one of those guys that really needed it. As far as, I think you're right, the nuance, of route running and things like that. Which, a lot of these guys in college, they just, especially when you're 6'4", big as he is, he just outmuscled people and outran people. But it's that nuance of the game that now you're going up against, these corners that are just terrific. And, you gotta up your game too.
There you go. All right, let's move on to the developmental guys. And we get into the first of the offensive lineman, Ben Bredesen, short-armed player. I think the Ravens probably see his future at center, which might have something to do with Skura. There's been talk of moving Bozeman. I honestly think that's probably less likely to happen. I think they're more likely to stay with Bozeman at left guard and have one of these next two guys on the list, being Bredesen and Tristan Colon Castillo, be the guy who ends up being the center for the Ravens, or Skura to leave.
Yeah, I think that's probably, they while they like to have flexibility and, in training camps and, things like that, they would always move the offensive linemen all over the place. I think once they get into their role, so to speak, I don't think they want to mess with that. And I think that's why last year when Skura went down, I think a lot of people, and myself also at least, thought they'd probably move Powers into guard and move Bozeman over to center. And of course they brought Macari in because they wanted to keep, guys where they've been practicing for a long time and where they were comfortable with them. So and obviously off season's different. You can make that change a lot easier at that point. But if Bozeman's still playing as well as he is, then he should be the right guy at guard. And whether it's one of the guys they have or somebody else, you find your center if it's not going to be Skura.
Right. I'm basically feeling that same way about it. Is that they definitely don't like anything but a 1-for-1 change during a game if they can avoid it. And they had the not 1-for-1 change at tackle to move Orlando Brown over to the left side for one game. Even that's very non-Raven like. They would, past they would, if they had James Hurst, they just stuck him in at left tackle, even though it probably would have been worse than having Orlando Brown at left.
Yeah.
Tristan Colon, I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, I was going to say, I think it was worse.
Yeah.
Probably worse.
Tristan Colon Castillo, interesting move recently because he was brought onto the 53-man roster. And I thought, oh, wow, then he must be active for today because otherwise there's no other reason to bring him up. But it turns out someone was sniffing around trying to get him, and he's still inactive on game day after being elevated to the 53.
Yeah. So so the first time was they elevated him, and then that Monday they signed him to the 53. So, and I think Jeff Drebeck had said that the rumors were somebody was sniffing around him. He was there. He was one of their top undrafted free agents as far as guaranteed money and signing bonus. So, they clearly liked him a lot, and that some of the roster flexibility allowed them. I mean, I think he was protected the first couple weeks too, and then but even when you're protected, there is a small window. So I think you protect players on Tuesday. For that week, and if the game's over, or Wednesday if you have a Monday night game. But so there is a window on Monday if you played on Sunday, where those practice squad guys aren't protected anymore. Quote unquote.
Is that true? Okay, because I assumed it was a Tuesday to Tuesday protection.
No, that Monday is open. The idea is it's really. I think that it's really supposed to be not about protecting players forever, but about protecting them for that week because of injuries, and you might need to bring that guy up. I think that's the theory behind it. Put it that way.
Okay, I don't
using it that way, but I think that was the theory behind it.
Okay, I no longer see the value to protecting a long snapper, if that's really the rule. And here's my thinking: that if all you're really doing is protecting the chance of a long snapper injury between Tuesday and Sunday, well, that gives you 6 days of protection. Okay, let's look at it that way, or 5 days even. But the rest of the league is what you got to be worrying. And they have, 32 Mondays or 32 Sundays, more significantly, where they're taking long snapper injury risk. And then on Monday, they might gobble up your long snapper. 31 other teams.
Yeah, I mean, it may be just the idea that getting a long snapper off of the street is harder to do than getting a punter or a kicker off the street. I don't know that. That's just a thought. And it may be that they just really like this kid. And maybe they see him as, a potential future.
Yes.
And maybe, I think Cox is a free agent after this year.
Yeah, I think that's right.
So, maybe I know that, in the past they've brought in undrafted, long snappers, and I'm trying to remember the one switch, but they just given the one guy an extension the year before, and then he got beat out, which was, because we don't see, that's one thing we especially don't see, as fans to know, that was coming. We know when we don't get many, in the notes reports about the long snappers, how they did that day at training camp. So, so that maybe they really like the kid, or like I said, maybe it's just that, he's good. He's that good, whether he's the potential future here or not, but he'd be way better than somebody they'd have to pull off the street.
Right. I mean, thinking back, my essay was a guy that they drafted, and it was was he the 5th round guy, or was the 2001 guy they drafted was like a 5th round guy?
That was him. Yeah, that was him. And he got beat out. So he finished his rookie deal, or maybe he was even in the 3rd or 4th year. I mean, I don't think he finished his rookie deal, but I think they gave him an extension early. And it wasn't big, but, then like the next year, I can't remember the guy. The guy was here for a couple of years, but he beat him out. And actually, Macy never went anywhere. I mean, I think his career was pretty much done. So, he was small though, if I remember correctly. He was like 250. so maybe that was part of the reason. I can't remember the name of the guy that replaced him.
Yeah, no, the guy they replaced him, they wanted to put in at right tackle one game. He was down. He would have been the next guy up. So he's a little bit larger guy, maybe tight end size, but
Yeah.
still was. And I'm trying to remember the guy's name. It might have begun with a K or an L. And okay, well, it's going to drive me nuts now. But Josh, can you look that up for us? Well, he's okay. We'll ask Josh to look it up for us when he gets back here from his break. So Colin Castillo, anyway, a guy who may be competing for a spot in camp next year. Next guy on the list is Devin Duvernay. Obviously, he's had more snaps these last couple games. Every time he touches the ball, it seems to be an electric offering here. Definitely somebody everybody wants to seem to see more of him. Nobody really seems to have a great plan for exactly how to do that.
Yeah. So, and then maybe that's maybe this is his role now, just to be that kind of utility guy, so to speak. And, I'm assuming he is, Willie Snead will be gone next year, and that he's going to assume that slot role on a permanent basis, so to speak, with the opportunity to, run these, jet sweeps and things like that, where they can get him more involved that way.
Yeah, that certainly makes a lot of sense. Hey, Josh, we got a little project for you while you're waiting there, and that is, who was the long snapper for the Ravens after Joe Maese? And Joe Maese, we think, it was done in about 2005 or 6 for the Ravens. All right,
I'm on it.
Thanks.
It's
I'll probably have it in a second. Yes.
Matt Catula, that's the guy.
Matt Catula. There you go. Yeah, I mean, if you think about it, they've only had, so sorry to go on tangents, but the first snapper when they got here was the tight end, Brian Kitchen. Mm-hmm. And then
he didn't last forever, because Kitchen, I think, was only here through 98 or 99.
I'm trying to think who was then they had to have somebody through the Super Bowl year. And then they, in 2001, Mace came. I know one year somebody got hurt, and the guy they brought in was terrible, and he basically lost us a Steelers game. He fired. I mean, his snaps were horrible, and we muffed 2 punts because of it. 2 punts didn't get off, or they got blocked because of it. And it was one of those typical, 13-10 Steeler games, and but for those. But since since 2001, there's been 3.
Yeah, that's a not too much turnover, that's for sure.
Probably 10 of those years, but.
All right, let's keep going here. After Devin Duvernay, Justice Hill, obviously a player who we expected more from last year, hasn't got back on the field as a running back yet in 2020, although he's made some impression as a gunner. In fact, so far he's been really keeping Chris Moore off the active roster, I think, because he's the gunner they're using along with Devin Duvernay. Duvernay's role as gunner, not in any jeopardy right now. He's been terrific. Justice Hill has been also very good. And Chris Moore, even though the finger seems to be healed, not ready to get back on the field.
Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah, because that was he certainly wasn't re-signed to be, for his wide receiver skills. He was clearly just depth there, and his main calling card was being the special team. So I mean, I think when we were talking about Dobbins, it depends on Hill may well next year. I mean, it'll only be his 3rd year. I mean, he may well have a role come back into play when if either Edwards or Ingram goes, then he's the incumbent 3rd, I guess we'll say at that point, 3rd back. So this may be just his year off, so to speak, from running back duties, unless there's further injury. But I think there still could be a role for him. I'm still though waiting. Speed was supposed to be his thing, and I've just not seen it translate to the field.
I hear what you're saying. Part of it is he hasn't been a good receiver, and so that's been a real negative, frankly. And he's been more a powerful runner when he's actually gotten a few chances to run, like against the Steelers last year. I think he's looked real powerful as a runner. But I agree, he has not really shown the speed that we were we were told to expect.
Now, that sometimes that's just, straight line speed versus football speed being different. And, you hear what some guys that are just supposed to be lightning fast, but it just seems like when they put the football in their hands, they're not as lightning fast.
Yeah. It is. It slows you down. There's no doubt about that.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely.
Let's move on.
Slows some down more than others, maybe.
Yeah. Patrick McCary next. He has not graded well by my system. He didn't grade well at guard last year. PFF likes him a lot more than I do. I have a different pressure standard, some different rules I apply to how blocks are done, but still I'm surprised there's as much of a difference. The last game he actually scored 0 on 14 snaps, so that's not a good place to be. But a versatile interior backup. I think one of the nice things about having Patrick McCary on the roster is you can put him in at guard or center with a drop off of play, and you can make a 1-for-1 change more easily.
Yeah, I mean, and he's going to be that, I don't know, 8th, 9th, 10th lineman always, probably. But he, as long as he's on his rookie deal and he's cheap, and even beyond that, if he comes back for the veteran minimum, I mean, he's a guy that you'd like to have around because you feel comfortable enough with him if you have to insert him. So, I mean, there's a place on this team for him. Whether he's a starter ever again, or only a starter because of injury, that's fine. But there's still something to be said for a guy that you feel relatively comfortable with, and who's going to know the system and be comfortable with his teammates and things like that. So at least for the next the rest of this year and 2 more, he's probably an easy guy to have around. Though he was an undrafted free agent, so
one more.
So right, so he would be, so they'd have to make a decision, and assuming he is what he is now, he's not getting an RFA tender, but he might be one of those guys that gets the 2-year lesser money deal, but because that may be all he can afford, all that anybody's going to pay him.
Well, one of the things that's been real nice about his play, and I can't praise him for everything he's done, but one of the things that's been really nice is he's one of the guys who can step in at center and give you a very consistent shotgun snap. And the Ravens had him, I believe, not in 20, but in 19, do basically all the shotgun snaps he could during camp. And Skura has actually had some problems arise with the shotgun snap that PFF grades him down for. It's actually not part of my system. It would only come up on a subjective adjustment. But it's interesting that we'll often have a difference, and I'll ask them, and he said, well, we graded him down for 2 shotgun snaps. That were way offline. So it's interesting that comes up. But anyway, that's a nice proposition with him.
Mm-hmm. Sure. Yeah.
Move on with Tyree Phillips here. For my money, he has not yet lost the job. I don't think the rest of the competition, honestly, has won it yet. And there's the backup quarterback's always the most popular guy in town, unless you live in Baltimore, where the backup left guard is, or the backup right guard is the most popular guy in town. And Ben Powers hasn't seen enough of the field, and when he has been on, people feel like he's been great. I think he's been quite good when he's been on the field, despite the holding penalty recently. But there's a reason why McCary is playing ahead of him, and it's practice and what the coaches are seeing. There has to be something they don't like about Ben Powers.
Yeah, there does. And last year, obviously it was why isn't he in? And, part of it was, at least the word or justification was that, he was back at that point, he was backing up at one position, and they didn't want to move him somewhere else.
Mm-hmm.
And when he played in the last game of the year, he played pretty well. I think he graded pretty well in your system.
Yes, he did. A.
Yeah. So, but I agree. There's got to be something, because, I mean, he's there's a rookie playing in front of him who wasn't on the team last year, who didn't have a training camp and didn't have OTAs
and played tackle in college.
Right. Yeah, exactly. And and he hears the heir apparent, so quote unquote, and he wasn't. I mean, it really didn't seem like he was in the conversation. It was good, at all. Fluker or and Phillips came in. It seemed like it was Fluker. Then Phillips came in later as the guy that was going to be. So, I mean, I would agree that seemingly it's got to be something about practice, because I mean, that's something that Harbaugh has always said. If you don't practice well, how do we know we can trust you in the game? So
anyway, it's I think he is a guy who there's less of an excuse for this year, because with 8 offensive linemen required among the 48. And I don't know if you saw the Browns and Bengals game here, but the Bengals actually got down to their 8th offensive lineman today. They had two more injuries on the line. Actually, they had 3 injuries on the line, which made number 8 play. So a Jenny or somebody was in at right tackle for Bobby Hart, which is probably not a downgrade at all because Bobby Hart's terrible. But they were down to the very end of their offensive line, and that's the first time I can remember it happening. Like NFL teams have carried 7 for so long, and yet I've never can remember a non-offensive lineman being asked to play the offensive line. We always talk about it like it might be a chance, but
I don't know who it would be. A tight end,
or you might have to bring a defensive lineman, Pat Ricard.
True.
So anyway, there'd be ways they address it. But anyway, Power's case, I think the 8 offensive linemen really reduces a lot of the excuse, because you've got the 1-for-1 position. He can be the 1-for-1 at guard, and McCary can be the 1-for-1 at center, and you can still have a 1-for-1 at tackle. I guess that's Fluker in this case. So it's not like he shouldn't be active, but at the end of camp, there's even talk about him being cut.
Yeah, so something's not right there.
All right, James Prochet, relatively little opportunity so far. Obviously, what he's got is on special teams. He hasn't been a bad punt returner outside of one punt that he let roll a lot of additional distance.
His first one, wasn't it?
Yeah, very first one, exactly. Has only just played a handful of snaps on offense. And what I really like to see out of a guy who's a return man is that he's also getting some snaps on offense in kind of the Duvernay role or a gadget play role where they're trying to fit him in.
Yeah, I mean, he's a 6th-round pick, so you can't, you'd like to see, him hit the ground running, but you got to expect that. I think he was drafted for the return man role more than anything, and if you're going to get, a little more out of him, anything else out of him offensively, now, he's supposedly has great hands, which is always good, but he's also more of a slot receiver. So, that puts him behind Duvernay probably in the pecking order anyway. But, it's as long as at this point, because, our return game has not been the greatest. And, God, that New England game last year, obviously in the end, it didn't matter. But when the kid from Alabama put the ball on the ground,
Cyrus Jones,
we're up 21-0 or 14-0 at that point. I think it was 14-0. And, we all momentum in the world. And, just spun the game on its heels. And with a team like that, that's not what you want to give them the opportunity. So it's nice to have a more sure-handed guy. And I know that they were the brass was really high on him, and they were thinking about taking him earlier. And then, but he was luckily that, obviously other players were higher, but they really liked him, and they were very pleased to get him in the 6th round.
Yeah. It seems like a bargain. Obviously, the 7th round guy they got is a guy I thought would already be in the safety discussion in Geno Stone, given the Ravens' need for a back end safety as well. But he's already on the practice squad. So what do you know?
Yeah, good.
That makes up the entire list of the developmental guys. So veterans playing for market value is a shorter list on offense than it was on defense, where that list is truly bulging and a lot of the money is being spent. The number of big contracts on offense is relatively small. I included the special teamers here to make it up to 10, so it's really only 7. Nick Boyle being the first. And I remember how much people laughed when they signed the Nick Boyle deal, and that was big news for the Ravens, but it turned out to be a pretty good deal, I think.
Yeah, I mean, he certainly provided more offense than we expected. But I mean, obviously, his blocking is what he's here for. That's his calling card. But it is certainly, and once you lose Hurst, you see him a little more in the offense. And, but yeah, I mean, I certainly don't have any complaints about that deal.
Yeah, I like, Boyle hadn't been a guy who'd caught any touchdown passes through about midway through last year, and they finally got him the ball for a touchdown. But he's shown really good extended play work with Jackson, and he had a great extended play work with Jackson for the touchdown in this last game against the Eagles. Play was extended, and he knew just when to float out, Jackson had the trust in him to throw the ball at the 2-yard line. He got in. That play where Jackson shot put the pass to him at Buffalo last year,
Right.
is another extended play, kind of improvisational thing that he was ready for it, even though it took him about 3 chances on the way down to hold that ball in.
Yeah.
Anyway, Nick Boyle, we're happy with him. Morgan Cox on the final year of his deal. Anything to say about him that we didn't already cover?
No, I think we kind of covered him when we were talking about the rookie practice squad. So, yeah, I mean, he's a guy who could probably continue to play. The only thing I would say is next year when you're looking for some cap space here and there because it's gone down, that I mean, it's not like he's making a lot, but every little bit helps, and maybe that's where that's a minor move you make to just create a little bit of extra space because this other kid is really good.
Mm-hmm. All right. DJ Fluker, a guy we thought might be at guard. And I do want to address this. I've talked about this occasionally on the offensive pod. But Fluker, it seems to be the backup tackle right now, and they don't really want to take a chance with him, is my observation of this, by playing him at guard, even though I think he'd be better there and probably be really ideal for being the physical mauler they need in a lot of ways. But there's 2 reasons. One is injury, and the Ravens don't have any other real tackles on the roster. They'd have to do something probably with moving Phillips to tackle, which I don't think would be as attractive, or bringing Will Holden off the practice squad to play. Again, not a good deal. The guy's played with a lot of teams. But the other part of it is that they have 3 guys who are first or second year players at right guard, and boy, wouldn't it be a payoff if one of those guys can play.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, I think you're probably right. They don't want to risk Fluker. And we certainly, I think we feel the same way in the way that we don't want to see him, or as strongly, I should say, but at tackle at least. But yeah, I mean, I do agree too that that physical presence at guard would be, I think, something that they're missing a little of. But I think when we did this last time in the spring or summer, I don't remember
after the regular season, it would have been in January.
I know that. Well, so I thought it was I was talking to you, but the lack of a swing tackle is something that might be one of the more glaring roster holes they have right now. Which speaks to that they have a lot of great starters and and all of that, but that there's just so that's their place where their depth is really lacking.
Right, and that's a general depth chasm and across the entire league, is that tackles just aren't available, and COVID has made it worse because 19 of 31 of the guys who opted out were either offensive or defensive linemen. So
Right.
You had these high BMI guys really were taking it, wanted to be careful with themselves. Fluker's a guy. He's cheap. I don't think it'd be unexpected if the Ravens wanted him back again next year for the same kind of insurance policy he's providing this year. I don't know if he'd want to be back, would be the problem.
Well, right, and I mean, he signed, on the later side, so I don't know, but it's not like he's playing to prove to anybody that he deserves more right now either.
Mhm.
So, and of course now they will have Andre Smith back next year, who was, I guess, the original was, Plan A. For the swing tackle.
That's so scary, just you saying that out loud.
Well, it was Plan A at that point. Right?
Yes.
But the rest of the offseason didn't really do much to get rid of that Plan A. I guess Fluker did to an extent, and maybe that's why Smith. That another reason Smith opted out. But he was always one that carried way too much weight, also. So, yeah, I mean, it would be nice for them to be able to use a 4th round pick. And now at this point they only have 5, maybe 6 with a comp pick. Next year draft pick. So they're not going to have a lot of options. But it would be nice to get a young swing tackle in the draft, because that's probably the only way you're going to get them. Signing a veteran, it means you're just signing a guy that's failed at tackle, as a starting tackle. And it'd be nice to be able to get that kind of swing tackle guy, and that way you got a guy that in that role for 4 years, and if maybe he becomes a starter in the 3rd or 4th year, but for the time being he provides that that nice that nice depth. But it's kind of hard when why we drafting a true offensive tackle in the third round when we have Orlando Brown and Ronnie Stanley around. So I guess that's kind of hard to justify in some cases, but I think it's very important.
Yeah, I mean, you need a developmental player. The Sanat pick was good in a lot of ways. It was a small school pick, so you had hope that DeCosta was finding value where everybody else had missed it. You had a guy who was clearly a developmental player. It might take him 2 years to be ready, so it's not a threat to either of the people. And he's a player who can step in an emergency, get you through 2 weeks maybe, hopefully without 5 holding penalties. But it didn't work out anyway, and it was a shame. All right, Robert Griffin III, the next guy on the list. Obviously, do you think he's adapted to the thought that he's a career clipboard guy at this point?
I think the league is adapted to that. So I'm not sure he has much choice. I don't see any. He could go somewhere where he might be able to compete. I don't even see that. But where that maybe the quarterback situation's a little shakier. Maybe I don't think he's getting a chance to compete for a starting job, but he may be, in that situation where I've got more of a chance to play here than behind Lamar. A lot of what will happen with him, again, there's a place you can save some cap space. So whether it's McSorley or Huntley or both of them together, that may be, and at this point, he's as much of a mentor, I think, to Lamar as he's a backup quarterback. So maybe by then they don't feel they need it anymore.
Yeah, that's where I think his value is. I mean, if you've ever heard him at the podium, he's incredibly intelligent, extremely well-spoken, probably just about more so than any other Raven. I can't think of who it would be who really was a better, more natural public speaker. One of the things he gets, if you ever see these little things the media department does, where they ask him to either reach in a box and feel what the thing is, or they embarrass them some way by asking him what was the first CD you owned, or that kind of stuff, he knows exactly how to play it. It's always like, well, it was Spice Girls, actually. I'm embarrassed by this, but that's what it was. He knows exactly how to make fun of himself in that setting. It seems to me he'll be a good announcer someday, if he wants to go that route.
Right. Maybe transition to a coaching role too at some point, but yeah, I have a feeling that this may be his last year here.
Okay, Sam Cook, he's ageless, obviously, and now the most tenured Raven of all time.
Yeah, I don't see him going anywhere. I know he's another guy for some reason that fans wanted, and not that they didn't like his performance, but he's a punter, so. And we're paying him too much. And, just last summer when everybody was talking about the kid they traded to Minnesota, it's time for Cook to go. We can save a lot of cap space. And, that's one place I don't want to save cap space. Unless he really falters over the next 10 or games in the playoffs, I don't see him going anywhere. And yes, you could save some cap space there, but unless you have a true, rock star coming up behind him that you found from somewhere, I don't see any reason for him to go anywhere.
You'd really have to get it right, because he's not only is he a great punter, he's the greatest holder in NFL history. I mean, there's just no doubt about it in my mind. I mean, Tucker would have nowhere near the success were it not for Cook. And, Cook held for many years for Stover, some years for Stover as well before all this started.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, it's one of those things you just don't, and it goes to Cox too. You don't want to necessarily mess with it unless at some point maybe you have to, but certainly with the kicker and the punter being the holder, I don't want to see him going anywhere.
Yeah. All right. New 5-year deal for Cook this offseason. Actually, I think he just actually got extended, right? Because he
did.
So
last offseason.
Let's go through some of the rest of these guys. We have talked about Patrick Ricard obviously getting a fair number of snaps now this year on a fairly team-friendly deal, in my opinion, that lasts through 21, correct?
Yes.
Okay. You mentioned Willie Snead earlier as being a guy who might have to give up his slot role. He'll be a free agent at the end of the season. There's no reason from my point of view, that he has to be back. It could be a right player, right place situation,
Right.
but there's no reason why he has to be back.
And he would have to, and I'm not saying he'd probably have to anywhere, but he's going to have to take a substantial pay cut to come back. He's making, I don't know, $2 million a year right now. I don't see him coming back at that price when you've got Duvernay, who's got, wheels that he doesn't have. Who's certainly so far has seemed like he's adjusted the NFL very well. And you got Prochet back there too. So whether, so I just, I think it's that's one where you're not cutting him, but you're saving cap space by not bringing him back. And that's what you have these two young guys for in the first place.
Okay, so Prochet is a guy who has played basically 0 special team snaps outside of being a punt returner. But Snead has only played a handful of special team snaps the last 3 years, but played more when he was at New Orleans. So the question for me would be, is he a guy who can go back to being a special teams player / backup slot receiver and take a little bit less money to do it? Or does he really want to go to another team and just be a slot receiver?
Well, and that may well be true. He may want to try to find a team where he's going to get more opportunity. This offense is obviously has been limited opportunity. Now he did re-up last year, so for another year. But so far it's not like he's, I think his numbers are probably down from last year at this point. And that's just my observation. But I think that's probably going to be part of, to extend his career as long as possible. I think he needs to go someplace where he's going to get a little more opportunity to see the ball.
Yeah, I would agree with that. So the nice thing about the passes he's been throwing this year is that he's at almost 10 yards per target, 9.9. And that's a high catch rate figuring into that. And the Ravens don't have a ton of that with their wide receivers this year. You always pretty much get it with running backs, but you don't always get it with wide receivers.
Right.
So that's been something he's done well this year. Ronnie Stanley, we talked about a little bit earlier. Obviously, he's how they figure him out, whether it's franchise, or figure out his contract value. The thing that comes to mind for me is that he needs to come to terms with the notion that whatever his value is, it's going to be determined on F1, F2, and then all the years after that, meaning 2 franchise years potentially. Pat Kerwin always used to be able to lay that out for players very effectively, or he used to. I don't know if he did it for players like that. He probably did it for agents like that, and he does a very good job of it on Sirius FM in explaining how you have to structure these deals. And if he's got 2 franchise years, I think he can't possibly make Tunsil money.
Well, it's true. I mean, that's probably true because the franchise tag is going to be. I mean, Tunsil's is such a outlier. But it's just you never know what motivates guys and whether I got to be the highest or whether it's just I don't know how to describe it. I don't know who his agent is. Some agents work it differently. I don't know. I'm not as particularly optimistic about it. I mean, I know they'll franchise him if they have to. I would assume they would. I mean, they got to figure something out between he and the 2 edge rushers. And I don't know, the priority, that all is going to be determined, for the next rest of the season. But I've got to think Stanley will be here next year, whether it's the tag or whether it's a long term.
Mm-hmm.
Because you just don't give up left tackles, and he's, I don't think he's playing at the same level he was last year, but he's been a little more banged up too. But I don't, he's tried and true at this point. So I just can't imagine them letting him get away.
Right. I mean, I agree. I think this is really the first year that Tunsil has outplayed him, and that's that might be part of the problem. I would think the number for him is something like 5 years, $100 million. Maybe it's 105, 108 million, but I don't think it's 5 years for 110 million if there's an F1 and F2 that are still front loaded on that. And Tunsil somehow gets a 3-year deal at 66 million, which is completely incongruous with that because they presumably could have franchised him twice in a similar manner, right?
Yeah, sure. Yeah.
Same year of draft, everything. So.
Yep, absolutely. Now he was, yeah, and actually, was Tunsil even a top 10 pick? So he would have been,
13th.
yeah, so he would have been cheaper because the top 10 under the old rules got
Wow.
higher fifth year options.
A great point there. That really would have been different then. Well, let's talk about the last year, and this is a guy we haven't talked about. But when you talk about the franchise tag, is there any risk of losing Justin Tucker, who's a free agent, I believe, this winter?
No, he just re-upped last year.
Did he? Okay.
Yeah, he just re-upped last offseason. So I mean, offseason 19. No, so he's probably, I don't know, they add 4. He had one to go, and they added 4. I'll look it up, but
You're right. He's signed through 23. I don't know why I had that wrong. I thought he was a free agent at the end of this year.
No, they were proactive with him and got him done early.
All right, terrific. Okay, he's basically at a $5.1 million cap number until 23.
Yeah.
All right. That takes care of the players at market value. We already talked a little bit about Mark Ingram being a veteran cap value concern. I don't really see a way they keep him. Obviously, the injuries have started to pile up between week 16, I guess it was, of last year, when he missed a game, then not being really as in top form for the playoff game, and then obviously what happened against the Eagles.
Yeah. So yeah, I think that's true, and obviously we'll see how it plays out and how he recovers and how Dobbins looks the rest of the way. But yeah, I mean, I think as soon as they drafted Dobbins, next year was going to be tough for Ingram unless he really lit it on fire.
All right. Got 4 players on the offensive side that are in the transitional category, and those are Trace McSorley, Chris Moore, and Antoine Wesley, and DeAndre White. Now, DeAndre White, he's on the COVID list, right?
No,
he's
Wesley
injured.
and White, they're both on IR, yeah.
Okay. So they're not even, in some sense, they're not even really on the team, but they're on the roster because they're on IR, and presumably they'll be around to be dealt with after the season or before next camp, or maybe during next camp, if that's where it comes to.
Yeah, DeAndre White, I believe, is a veteran, so he would be a free agent next year. Wesley would be Wesley would actually be only in technically his second year, even having spent his first year on IR. So, I mean, he's going to be on the team, at least he's going to be on that 90-man roster, during the off season, but obviously him making the 53 is pretty remote.
Right. Do you see any opportunity for Chris Moore to work his way back in on this team? Whether it's, to me, there has to be a dual role for players once they get to this point in their career, because it's too easy to get younger special teams players on their rookie deals unless they have some offense or defense role that goes with that special teams role.
Yeah, I mean, I would think not. I mean, this was his chance to establish himself as a Anthony Levine type player, I guess we'll say. But obviously, so far that hasn't happened. And now that some of the younger guys are basically have assumed his role, and they do have more of a dual threat, so to speak. Dual purpose maybe better, but because I don't think Moore's a threat as a wide receiver. But so yeah, I think this is probably his last year. And again, he might be a guy they signed for the veteran minimum again, and he's on the 90-man roster and only makes the 53 if there's such attrition in front of him that somehow he's the next man, he's the first man standing or the last man standing, however direction you want to look at it.
I mean, his current position is not one that is stable. He can't be on the 53 but not on the 48-man active roster and have value to the Ravens. He's got to be activated and playing a lot of special teams to be of value.
Yeah. I mean, at this point, I'd rather have Geno Stone than him on the roster.
Oh, sure.
Yeah. Because I mean, you can put more on the practice squad. I think for your future, that's a better proposition at this point. But obviously, that's not the direction they've gone.
Yeah, that may still come later this year. That's a good point. That could be it. Well, Brian, thanks again for joining us for these. These are always outstanding discussions. And let's tell people where your work is again.
Sure. So my articles are on Russell Street Report. It's kind of my quiet time, but once the off season kicks in and what are we going to do and how much money do we have? That's always now they have more cap space depending this year with the the drop in the cap. But last year and for future years, it looks like they're going to be in a little better shape. So my role is a little less. How do we create? It's not how do we create space? How are we going to figure this out? Like it has been over the past decade or so. And then I'm on Twitter at Ravens Salary Cap, and that's my place to break as much news as I can, or when breaking news happens, try to get numbers out as quickly as I can to put some context to these signings.
That's outstanding stuff, and I think people are foolish if they don't tag at Ravens Salary Cap at the end of their cap questions or their cap suppositions. It's something I always do, kind of as a way to cover my own rear end when I'm out on a limb in terms of cap knowledge I don't have. But Brian, always appreciate having you on, and we'll have you back on for these shows as much as you like. It's always a great discussion with you.
Always a pleasure. Absolutely.
All right, now Josh, what do we need to remind people about otherwise?
My bookie. Go over there, use the code Ravens, and hopefully win yourself some money.
$1,000. I can't believe there's an offer of matching dollars that high, but that sounds really good.
Yeah, that's not my wallet to throw $1,000 on here as a gamble, but I did enjoy matching my $100.
All right. Well, terrific. We'll have the normal schedule of stuff returning for Week 7. With the game after the Steelers, with an offensive, defensive article, article, of course, but also the podcasts that go with that. A Know Your Foe then for the week after. Our Know Your Foe this week will be Alex Kozora of the Steelers, a great guest. Hope you'll tune in for that tomorrow. And we'll talk to you next time on Film Study.